This is
Tony Niknejadi.
and this show is called Back for Our Future. Now, you're just stumbling into this very first episode and you're asking yourself, oh, I came here because I'm a huge Michael J. Fox fan, or maybe you just really love Christopher Lloyd's hair. But in this case, that's not what we're going to talk about. This first episode is like any good pilot TV show. It's the setup for a series, because this is a series after all, albeit a podcast. We're going to talk about lots of different things, but really what we're focusing on over the point of this show is we ended up having a conversation talking about our past, looking at our future, like what it means. So part of it is this. We're both 40-ish. Let me ask you a question real quick, Tony. Let's just start off with a good question here.
Sure.
When someone says middle 40s, if someone were to describe mid 40s, what is the cutoff point for mid 40s? Because we are technically in the mid 40s.
Technically, you're in the mid 40s.
See, you're way more, you're stricter than I am. I'm going to
I
say mid 40s is up until 48.
48. Oh, then I'm good. Then I'm
That's what I'm
totally good right
saying.
now. Right. And so that's great. Yeah. I mean, I like that definition.
It's, I'm trying to keep it beneficial. So you have two dudes in their mid 40s. We grew up together. We're going to share a little bit about our story here in a second, because where it came from. But the important part about this show is a couple of things. One, it is a movie-based show. We're going to talk about movies. We're going to talk about our lives. We grew up in the 90s. That was like the heyday of our lives. I mean, we were both born, obviously, we're in our 40s. We were born in the 70s. But that's the heyday of our coming-of-age story, if you will. And we're going to document that through movies. And I think that's a real important part to realize is Tony and I both grew up together, and again, we'll get to that story. That's one part. Another part of it is the interesting side of looking at what has happened to cinema. And so in some ways, although this is a historical piece in some aspects, it's also the future element comes in that we're looking at what's going on in cinema going forward, because there is a difference and there is a little bit of commentary. And Tony and I don't always agree on some of those things, but that's the good part about it, is it's raw. We're like the Siskel and Ebert without the douchebaggery, is what I would like to say.
Right. Exactly. And, we do have thumbs, but we're not going to use them for this.
No, our thumbs are very much not as posable as Siskel's or Ebert's. God rest them. So let's kind of start off with one other thing that you should know. Tony is a historian. And I say that to say, as long as I've known him, which is, do the math. It's 30 something, 40 years.
Well, we've known each other since 89, so we're coming up on 35 years.
35 years I've known the guy. 35 years, and he has a fantastic, whereas his memory is a steel trap, mine is Swiss cheese. One of us consumed drugs, the other one did not. That's the reality of the situation.
They'll figure out which one's which.
It's a mystery for you to solve. Anyway. So if we go back, you just set it up there. We met in 1989. What is your? So I wanted you guys to know this because Tony does have a much better history. So some of the stuff I literally am going to relive in somewhat real time. We've talked about a few things, but as we go through it, what we found was interesting was uncovering these memories as we go through it. And I think a lot of us, we grow up and maybe you weren't fortunate enough to have a Tony in your life that does know this stuff and is a historian. That's just his nature, right? And he has this fantastic memory. So there's things that we've talked about, even just over the course of our friendship, where we've just been talking, and next thing you know, it's like, oh, dude, I totally forgot about that. Or on a very rare occasion, very rare, folks, I might actually have something that Tony didn't remember, and that's very rare, but it could happen. And it is interesting to watch in real time as we've gone through, which is part of the fun of the show. Is as we uncover those memories, it's interesting to see where we go with them. It's always a different take. So sit back and enjoy it. We're going to just give you guys a brief history. Tony, where do we start? How do we start this bad boy off?
You know where I'd like to start? I'd like to start with that video that you sent me.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The crazy video where our childhood teenage movie theater that we pretty much grew up in, because it was the only theater on our side of town at the time in the 90's, has been demolished. It went out of business back in like 2011, 2012,
That's right.
but it's still there. it's still there. Like the remnants of it are still there.
Yeah, it's really odd. Most movie theaters have been torn down. If a movie theater's gone out of business, what we've observed, both you and I, and living in different places all over the country, if a movie theater goes bye bye, it's gone. Like one of the other ones that we saw stuff at, which we'll talk about, it's torn down. It's now rebuilt as a storage unit with a Walk-Ons, which is a Drew Brees owned restaurant right in front of it. That was a very special movie theater for you and I. The only other theater that still stands in this town that is also long gone is called the Bel Air Twin, which is one of those old school two movie
Right.
theaters. That building is
That one.
still there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we'll get to
Yep.
that one in a minute. But yeah, that's but this video was a drone shot coming
Right.
over above and then into the theater, and all you see are just remnants and boards, and it doesn't even look like a movie theater. It's just
Yeah.
a
It's
blank
totally gutted.
space,
Yeah.
and it really pretty depressing to watch it, and that's what kind of launched this whole idea for this podcast, because we started talking about it, and then you came up with the idea that it would be a great podcast. So I was on board completely.
Right.
But that's kind of what launched it, and I was like, man, that's pretty rough to see all our old movie theaters, literally all the old movie theaters in Mobile, Alabama, gone. All the
Yeah.
old.
We should probably preface that and say a little bit about where we came from. And we
Sure.
met because we both lived in Mobile, Alabama, though I was more or less born and raised here in the sense of I moved here when I was like 2. You, however, came from parts unknown.
Yeah, I moved from New Jersey, from
Yep.
Glen Gardner, New Jersey, a really really small town in New Jersey that didn't have a movie theater,
Yeah.
and didn't even have its own school. I had to be bused to another town. I had to be bused to Clinton, New Jersey, to go to school. And in 1989, I moved into Mobile, Alabama, Charlotte Oaks Drive, and I started there in August of 1989. That's when I got there.
Oh, I didn't realize. Okay. So that's something I didn't think I realized. I thought you had been there for a year or two. So, because I moved in November, right?
Yeah,
Wasn't it
so
November?
I
Yeah.
get there in August, and
Yeah.
that ironically is the 20th anniversary of Woodstock, which is
Oh,
announced in like
wow.
5 years.
Right.
But
Right.
it's the anniversary of Woodstock, and they were playing it on the radio, and I remember that whole summer. And then your house is literally right across the street from mine, and
Yep.
it's getting built, and I watched it from start to finish being
Right.
built, and from the first day to the last day, and then you move in like in the fall.
That's wild. So I must have been, I think I was in 6th grade or something, or going into 6th grade, or maybe I was coming out of the 5th. I
I was,
don't totally
I
remember, but
don't even actually know what grade you were in, but
how old
I
were
was,
you? You said
I was
12?
well, I was 13 by the time you move in,
Right.
but
That's
I
right.
was 12 watching your house be built.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was pretty. I never seen a
Yeah.
house
It's
be
one of those. So people kind of, if we set the stage of it, so everyone understands, this is not like a large neighborhood. This actually is a single cul-de-sac or court, whatever you want to call it. I know what people say across the country, but it is literally a single street. And on that street, there was a variety of houses. The majority of them, based on where these were, the majority of the houses did not contain young people.
not at all. Not very many at all. There's maybe 3 houses that contain young people, and really, the street could be likened a lot to the movie The Burbs. Quite
Oh
honestly,
Lord,
I
that's
mean,
true.
it could be. Now, there wasn't any strange stuff obviously happening on the street. It wasn't like that, but I mean, the design of it, and the layout of it was very
Yep.
similar. Cul-de-sac, there's not that many houses. There's like 15 houses.
Yeah. And so it was a very contained neighborhood. And in today's terms, it's a little bit different. I will tell you the one thing that I don't like to do is, and it's one of my downfalls, is I like to look at the past to inform the future, but I don't ever compare directly, say, well, when I grew up, it was better. No, because when every generation grew up, it was better. You learn as you get older. Everybody looks back at better. My parents' generation says their childhood was better than whatever. That's not the point. But what is interesting from a historical fact is that because we're a cul-de-sac, we were very shielded. If somebody drove into that neighborhood, they were there for a reason. And if they weren't, they typically didn't get very far in before they spun around, which was not at my house or your house. We were deep enough into the neighborhood that we were pretty much shielded, which led to a lot of things that will take place over time. And some of that was a variety of sports ball in the street, whether it was football, if you want to call it football, or wiffle ball or ghost man baseball. There was some wrestling involved sometimes, and there was a lot of different things. But
That
because this street existed, we were shielded from a lot of the traffic, which is important to note that if we're telling a story like filmmakers, which we should probably have prefaced that we're both filmmakers now professionally, but as filmmakers, we're doing our best to set this up to say that relationship or having that shielding meant that we spent more time outside. We spent more time hanging out, which really allowed us to start to build a friendship towards the end of '89. I know we didn't hang out much, but we'd see each other and
right.
do the whole boy posturing garbage that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's how, I mean, our parents got us together. I remember it very vividly. My mom was like, "We're going to go over and meet the neighbors," and I was like, "Okay, great, let's do that." And then we go over there, and the first thing you say is, "Do you play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the Nintendo?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I have that game." And you're like, "Maybe you can help me." And that's really what I remember from that exact day.
Oh, that's fantastic. What's funny is for anybody that's a gamer, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if you've not played it, has this level where you have to swim through the seaweed, and it's the hardest insert an F word stuff I've ever played. It's known as one of the hardest games. It was brutal, and all I saw was, hey, here's a kid older than me. He looks smarter than me. I'm going to ask him to see if he can help me beat it. I just wanted to get past that level so bad. I do remember that. I remember a fragment of that conversation, but that is fascinating. That was Ninja Turtles got the now, had that movie come out yet? Yeah, that already come out, right? That came out in '89, maybe.
No, no, it hadn't come out. We hadn't seen all the turtle films yet. We saw the commercial, all
Okay,
the cartoons and everything. Yeah.
I got it. Got it. See, there's a point of which Tony's memory steel trap. Yeah, so we end up getting together early on. Now we hung out some in 1989, but that wasn't like the primary time when we were doing a lot of hanging out.
Nah, not much in '89 because you had just moved in November, and there was with holidays and stuff like that. I was out of town and a little bit here and there towards the back end of '89, and with Thanksgiving and Christmas and all that. We didn't really hang out much in '89. We started hanging out a little bit more in '90.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of like we start doing stuff around the street and things like that. '90, '91. It's kind of our time to roll around the street and hang out and get in some weird mischief.
Yeah. Now, there's a couple of like fragments of stories that are classic bits that have that have existed in our life for a very long time. When was the world famous Nintendo maps? And I will gladly share the story. But when was the Nintendo map story? Because
Yeah,
that was
that's the 1990 story.
that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So to be Goldberg's for a moment, it was 1990 something, but it was 90. I had gone to my dad's hunting camp and I had secured some top notch adult materials. Now, these adult materials consisted of, they didn't have Playboy. It was top shelf for a young man interested in the opposite sex. It was Penthouse, which was considered the most aggressive pornography on the planet at the time. It was pretty aggressive porn. And I had meticulously gone through these adult magazines and cut out specific pictures with a razor blade so that the pages didn't, I mean, in my brain, it was probably terribly done, but the pages were cut so well that it would be very difficult to find these nude images. Now, this is pre-internet. There's no internet that exists. We have that. So I brought them back and I'm going to share them with my buddies. Tony being one of my buddies. And I'm like, hey, pal, I got these great porno mag pieces. And they were literally in I do remember this, they were in a plastic bag, if I remember, like a Ziploc bag. Might have
Oh
even
yeah.
been a gallon Ziploc bag, folded up, nice and neat, tucked in. And if I remember correctly, we were going to a Saints game. Is that correct?
Yeah. So what we used to do is you and I would take that little bag and we would go over to the wooded area that was on the other side of your house, where the house had not been built yet. Would be
That's
built
right.
eventually, but hadn't been built yet. So it was woods. That's all it was.
Yeah.
It was a wooded area, and you and I had a spot that we would hide those those images, and in this bag, and we would hide it. And I'm not exactly sure why you did it. I don't know what you were thinking at the time. I'm gonna assume I know, but I don't want to say it here. But these got moved by you into your home,
Yes, they were secured. I did secure them.
and we were going to go to a Saints game. And my
Right.
dad had New Orleans Saints season tickets, and they were good then because they were back in they were in the playoffs around that time. And you were going to go to a game with us, and I'm taking a shower, and all of a sudden, my mom comes up and says, "Drew can't go to the Saints game. He's been grounded. Um, do you have someone else who wants to go?" So I call up another one of my buddies. He ends up going, but I'm like trying to figure out what's going on with you. Like all of a sudden, you've been grounded, and
Yeah.
then and then I get the story, and you can tell that part of it.
Yeah. So I knew that because I was going to be gone for I think we were staying the night. Were we not staying the night?
We were staying the night.
Yeah. We were staying the night. So I was like, I can't, I had the images in my possession, in my room, in my house. And I knew that I couldn't keep them there because I have a very, my mom is very similar to Beverly Goldberg. There's no lie about it. Like, so I have a very attentive and very observant mother. And she would know, she would find them somehow. Like a truffle pig, she would find any contraband I had. She could smell it and she would find it. That sounds disgusting when said when we're talking about what we're talking about, but it's a great analogy. So I was like, well, I got to get them out. So I had put them in the bag, in my travel bag, because I was like, well, I'll get them out of here, and then they'll just be in my bag, and then I can give them to Tony, and then Tony can deal with them or whatever, or I can put them back in the wood, whatever. I just knew I had to get them out of the house. So I put them in my bag. Well, she decided that she should check to see what I packed, because Lord knows I'm a, however old I guess I was 13 at that point, 12, somewhere in there. I have packed my clothes. My mom goes through my bag, and when she does, she finds this and she says, "What is this?" And she looks. Now my mom is 100% very much not a fan of pornography, to say that the least. So when she sees this, she starts to figure out what it is, probably because it wasn't hard to figure out, and she starts to become unraveled. And I snatch them out of her hands, the plastic bag, and I run to the front door in my 12-year-old, 13-year-old brain, and I toss these right out the front door. I was like, "I'll get them later. Don't worry about it." And she's like, "No, what are those?" And I told her they were Nintendo maps. So if anyone doesn't know what this is, back in the day, Nintendo used to put out maps for your games like Ninja Turtles and other stuff that we were talking about. They would put out these maps, and I lied straight up to my mom that it was Ninja Turtle, or that it was basically Nintendo maps. Which point she made me walk out there, bring them in, and then she unfolded them one by one to my embarrassment and berated me to no end of like, "No woman does this. No woman does this." I just will never forget her saying that, because it was probably a lady like in a very compromised pose. And she's just going off. She calls my dad. My dad comes home and he's like, "Nope." I mean, he was upset, but he also was like, I mean, he's a 12-year-old boy. Like he wasn't like anti her, but he supported it. So of course I was grounded. Now to tie this back into movies, I will tell you, I have a very fond memory of that moment. I saw, because it was in theaters at Carmike, by the way, which we're going to tee up. The movie theater we said was destroyed. This is why this theater is so important. Here I am punished. I'm grounded for over a week. I believe it was almost 2 weeks. I'm grounded for a week. I don't get to go to the Saints game with one of my best friends, and I'm in trouble. But my parents wanted to go see a movie because that theater was close enough, and it was a family moment, which is, again, part of the impetus of this show is to say, when we lost the movie theaters to some extent, the fact that movie theaters aren't that special. This was a, hey, you've been punished, but we're still doing something as a family. And we went to go see 3 Men and a Little Lady, I believe, would have been out in that time frame. Is that correct? Would that be it's one of those?
Time frame. Yeah.
Yeah. So we went to go see Three Men and a Little Lady in theaters with Nancy Travis, who becomes important later on in our lives. So I go see Three Men and a Little Lady, and so that movie and that time frame is always burned. I actually fell in love with film. I love Star Wars and stuff growing up, but that's one of the moments in my life where I fell in love with film because at that point I can honestly say as a filmmaker, I didn't know yet then what I know now. I did see something amazing happen. Despite the tension and the frustration and the disparity in my family, we still gathered and rallied around a movie and enjoyed, although a very simple, arguably not necessarily one of the greatest movies ever made, but we did sit together as a family and watch a movie and enjoy it. And I think that story is interesting and funny, obviously a little bit shameful on my behalf, but it does really tee up the truth of part of why we wanted to have this conversation and record it is that's what movies used to do. And I'm not saying that they don't now, but when we think back and we uncover some of these stories and where we came from, I think there's a lot of interesting weight on that. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, does that make sense? I know movies are big in your family too, but
Yeah. Well, I still go to the movies with my mom, like all every week. So I mean, her and I go to the movie theaters every week still, to this
right,
day. 47-year
right,
old and his mom, you know. So I mean, it's always been a big deal for me. I mean, and my mom and I have always gone to films pretty much my whole life, and my brother as well. So I mean, we still go to the cinema a lot, and always have, always will, and that's where I like to see all the films. I see everything there, and then I will watch it for 20 times later on. But
yeah,
but yeah, I mean it's always the best place. I mean, you meet people there, you see people there. It's one of the great bastions that we still have where people can hang out with each other and get to experience something that's so profound at one time.
right, right. So let's talk about that. We set up 90 and we kind of gave you guys a little taste into it of the hijinks that occur. And there's more along the way. I assure you there's more along the way. Let's talk about one of the things we were going to talk about is to set the time frame a little bit more, the state of movie theaters, because nowadays I think movie theaters with AMC owning so many and then all these major national chains. I mean, there's still regionals, but there's a lot of nationals. The movie theater scene specifically where we were growing up, which again, movies were a part of our lives. If you guys haven't figured that out, was very different. And I'll let you talk about the history of that because there weren't that many theaters. And you mentioned it in the beginning of the tease a little bit about Carmack 10 being on the west side and the challenges there. Give us a rundown. What was the theater scene like, the movie theater scene like in that time frame from what is that, 89 to 92? Because
Yeah.
92 is an important year for us. But go ahead and tee that up.
So when I get there in '89 and I'm visiting my dad who was out of town, trying to set us all up in Mobile, Alabama from New Jersey, the first theater that I ever come across is Springdale Six. And Springdale Six is a very interesting theater because it's a movie theater, a six cine inside of a mall, in the
Right.
middle of the mall.
Right.
And the great thing about Mobile that a lot of people don't know, and when they hear about it, they're just like, "What?" Is that there? If you go down Airport Boulevard, you have Springdale Mall, which is a shell of what it used to be because now it's all outdoor stores. It used to be an actual mall, and across the street, literally right across Airport Boulevard, is Bel Air Mall. There are two malls literally right next to each other. And it always shocked people that came in town. They were like, "You realize you have two malls right next to each other?" I'm like, "Yeah, we know that. We're well aware of it. It's just we didn't build them, but it happened." And in that little area, there's so many movie theaters. And you have Springdale Mall. That's the first one that I ever go to when I get there, and I see Police Academy 6.
Oh, it's one of my favorites, though. I love Police Academy 6 to this
which
day. I
which is
really
now
do.
now that franchise, one of the only franchises to ever do this, where it starts out hard R rated, and by the time it gets to like Police Academy 6 and Police Academy when they go to Moscow and all that stuff, they're PG, they're
Right.
solid PG, and
Right.
so one of the only franchises to ever do it. Mom and I go to see Police Academy 6 while we're just hanging out in town. And there were a lot of movies playing at that point, The Burbs and stuff like that. But we saw Police Academy 6. So it was great. It was fun. We had a good time. And so we went to Springdale Mall, and like they said, that's right directly in the mall. You actually have to go inside the mall and go to this little cine. And then across the street at Bel Air, there is a Bel Air Twin 2
Yep.
that is literally right next to the mall. It's
Right.
it's not attached to the mall. It's not in the mall. It's on the side of the mall. And then on the
And
opposite side, what's it? Go ahead.
I was going to say real quick, I will do my best to go get some photos, and we'll post them on the Twitter. You can on or X. What do you call it now? I don't know. I'm not on the Twitter,
We
but
can call
Tony
it that
handles the Twitter.
on Twitter. I think they all know what it is at this
Yeah.
point.
I will get photos to Tony and he will post them. So if you'd like to see what buildings look like now, along with the video link, I'll do my best to get that link. It'll definitely be in the show notes. The link will be, but we'll get those. Go ahead. So right across the street, you got the Bel Air Twin.
And then on the opposite side of that mall, on the other side of the mall, there's Village 6, which is another
That's right.
six, which is Village 6 is going to be a really important theater for us a few years from this.
That's right.
But, but, so you literally have three movie theaters right next to each other.
Now,
Go
were
ahead.
those Carmike owned? They weren't all Carmike owned, were
Those
they?
were all Carmike at the time.
So
Yeah.
think about that from a business model perspective. That's like the Starbucks model. If you think about it, it's like, hey, put a Starbucks across the street from a Starbucks next to a Starbucks. That's what I mean, they had oversaturated their entire market, right? In
Right.
a small area. You've got 18, 12, 14 screens right there. 14. But you have to drive to all these. And did they show overlapping movies? Because I think
No,
they did. No, they
no,
didn't.
those did not. So
Oh, interesting.
nothing overlapped. So you had those three theaters, and then on Dolphin Street, which was like
Yep.
basically running parallel because all the streets kind of run parallel to each
It sure
other.
was. It
You
sure
you
was.
parallel a couple streets over, and you have Dolphin Street, which is like Dolphin Street Theater, which is kind of in the like a little bit more quote unquote whatever you want to call it sketchy area of town, I
Sure.
guess.
Sure.
So but I saw a ton of movies there, but they
Same.
none of those theaters overlapped movies, believe it or
That's
not.
fascinating to me. Even like big blockbuster stuff.
No, they didn't.
That's
Like
incredible.
like
I do remember seeing for example, at Dolphin Street, I believe I saw either Lethal Weapon 3 with my mom or Terminator 2 with my dad at at Dolphin Street. I can't remember which one, but I remember it being, those didn't come out in the same year frame, but I just remember it being an R-rated. It was one of my first R-rated movies or whatever. I just remember that scenario. And I think it was Terminator 2 that I would have seen over there. But anyway, yeah. So you've got all these theaters almost in parallel alignment, right?
right. Also, and one of our all-time favorite theaters, before you even get to the mall, you get Movies 10,
Great class.
which was our dollar theater. And when I say dollar theater, it literally cost $1 to get into this place.
It sure
Dollar
did.
fifty if you saw it after like 6 o'clock.
Yep. Yep. That's
And
absolutely right. And those were second run movies, right?
those are second run, yeah. So you have to wait, probably a couple months or so to see one of those in there, one of your bigger films. But that was right next to, that's like in the Riviera Center, the old Riviera
Yep.
Center, and they used to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
they used to have, and that was a big hangout spot for me because there was a gym there. I didn't hang out in the gym, but point being, but I did go to the theater a lot, and there was also a store in there called Farmore,
Oh yeah.
and Farmore was like kind of the quintessential place where my family and I hung out, and it was very movie related because Farmore had a huge movie rental section,
They sure did.
and they had coupon books
Yeah.
that you could get where you could get 50 rentals, and each rental, by the time you got them in this coupon book, they were only 25 cents a piece.
That's ridiculous.
So we would rent the quota, which is you couldn't rent more than six. So we would go rent six movies, watch them over the entire weekend, and bring them back. And we would do this. We did this for years, years until the Farmore finally closed down years later. But
Right. Right.
we did that for a long time, and in addition to seeing all these movies in theaters. And so that was kind of the state of the movie theaters back then,
Right.
you know, when I first got there. And all those theaters, important to note, all those theaters are all drives. I mean, every theater's drive, but these were all like drives to like Midtown and other
Right.
places that were not really close to Charlotte Oaks.
You're talking about a 20 to 25-minute drive minimum, sometimes 30 minutes just to get to a movie theater, depending on the traffic situation and whatever's going on that way. And what's interesting to me is you have those drives. We talked about a little bit. What was do you remember? I'm sure you have a ticket stub for them, but do you remember the economy of movies then? Was it like $4.25 or something? What was
Yeah.
a ticket? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's always a little bit more at night. It'd be like $6, something like that, to get in at
Yeah.
night. It was like, yeah, like $4, 4.50, somewhere in there. Yeah,
So somewhere in that range. I mean, you think about it back then. I remember minimum wage was like $3.25 an hour, somewhere in that range. So you know, you're spending, you're basically on par. A movie is an hour and a half, and you're spending literally an hour and a half of your paycheck. If you're a minimum wage guy, like we weren't, we were younger, but if we were at minimum wage jobs, we would have spent an hour and a half of our paycheck. Meanwhile, unless you went to the dollar theater, which obviously is broke high school kids, became like the major spot for us to go see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of movies.
right, exactly. So that's kind of the state of where the movie theaters were for about 2 years,
Right.
and then all of a sudden, like magic, this movie theater starts getting built on the west side. And we're
Right.
like, "Is this?" And it really is the first of the quote unquote, and I hate to put it like this because I spent tons of times there, but this is kind of the first of the big cine cookie cutter type theaters, where it's like it loses, they all kind of, up until this point, they all kind of have a very distinct look and um, very unique look. Every one of those theaters had kind of a unique quality to it. This is going to be the first of the big box theaters that we now have kind of come to know these days.
Right. And that description is, you've got the external or internal box office,
Right.
depending on the busyness of it. And then it was like a giant lobby with the hallways to get to the other theaters themselves. So it's very much like there's not a lot of, and in this location, there was not a ton of ancillary things going on around it. There was a little miniature golf course called Mount Asia, I believe, that
That's right.
it used to be a dirt bike track. So that tells you, like, this part of the city was not as developed as it is now. Of course, as all cities grow, it grew with it. But it was like like the fact that the movie theater was there and then you had the little golf course was big, but there's nothing really else. Eventually there was an Applebee's, but there's nothing really else around it. Uh, that was there. And so it was a very remote, and it was getting where it was located was, so to give frame of reference, it's out west where we are, which is, a newer area. It's still relatively considered a safe environment, just like suburbs, if you will. It's, for lack of a better term, but it was on the edge of the suburbs, getting ready to go into an area called Tillman's Corner, which typically, historically, uh, has some money, but is more of a impoverished area as well. So like you're on the edge of like two different zones of people, so it's really they did a very good job picking a location because it serves multiple communities really well. And it gets built, when you said that was in 90, is that built, or
So that
89?
that that gets built in 91.
91. That's right. Okay.
So 91, that gets built, and all of a sudden opens up in 91. Yeah.
Now, do you, because of the steel trap, do you remember what the first movie was you saw there?
Yes. So I so yeah, in the late part of the year, we would see Hook.
Oh, there you go.
Hook was the first movie I ever saw there.
Right.
And you could get in with canned goods.
Like, you mean you just brought canned goods and you got to see the
Right.
movie
It
for
was,
free?
'cause it was around Christmas time.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And so you had Hook, you had The Last Boy Scout.
Oh, classic.
So that by the time this theater's built, it's 92. So it's like all those movies are playing 91, 92. So it's like, and they're and and now all of a sudden, boom, just like that. I saw Hook. My grandfather saw Last Boy Scout. I went to see Hook with my mom, my brother, of course, and some family members. And then I think my grandma was with us as well. My grandpa went to go see Last Boy Scout, which is obviously would become one of my favorite films. I didn't
Yeah,
see it.
I mean, yeah, that legendary film in that case. I saw a note on here that during that time frame, what else? What was the big run uh, at the end of '91? We were setting this up to get to where. Uh-oh, I lost you for a second.
Boom.
Oh, there you are. Somehow I have fireworks going off behind my head. Do you see that?
I don't know what happened. Probably could have said boom. Oh, I don't
Oh,
know.
maybe. I don't know. That was interesting. That was a weird effect. I don't know what it was. Um, but this tees up for sure. This tees up us getting to 92. And there's a couple of interesting things. And we're going to set up for the next episode as well that we're obviously this is an anthology going on. And we want to bring some other things along the way as we'll talk about the movies and such. It's in 92 that really our story of friendship, we're friends, we hang out, we spend time together, but basically an inseparable bond that has lasted. I mean, my God, man, we've known each other for 35 years. I'd say 33 of those years has been along this same bond where it doesn't matter where we are in our lives. We can call each other and talk about movies, wrestling. We both end up in the film industry together, right?
Right.
I'm directing, you're first ADing, we're running movies, you're producing, I'm directing, I'm DPing, whatever. We're doing this. We end up in the film industry as professional filmmakers, not just people that say that. We're legitimately there. We end up in this business helping each other grow our careers for our love of movies. Two different aspects in some ways. You like a lot more than I do. I like worse movies than you do, arguably sometimes. Nemesis being one of those with Oliver Grunier. Who knows
Oh,
why I
well,
love that movie so much? It's so bad though. It's so great. So this sets up for 92, right? And 1992 gets really special because that's when everything launches off for us. The movie theater is in full swing at this point. It's built,
right.
as you said, 91, end of 91, it really opens up and goes full speed. Let's tee it up. Talk to us. Where are we in 1992? What is the deal there?
1992 is an interesting year because in 1992, uh, you and I are definitely hanging out a little bit more.
Right.
Along the street, we've got some interesting things that are happening. As far as that's the year, that's the infamous Tito Santana shirt year.
Oh no, that is still to this day. It is still a sore subject between me and my. So I have a cousin who grew up with me more like a brother. Him and his sister. I'm essentially that makes me the middle child, and we went to a wrestling event. Me and Tony have always been wrestling fans. We go to a WWE event with my dad. My dad was always the sucker that had to take us to wrestling events. We go to this WWE event, a house show, I believe it was, and Tito Santana gets in the ring. And if you guys don't know, Tito Santana used to take his shirt off and he would swing it high over his head and toss it into the crowd. And that shirt floated. And I watched as my old man, me, Tony, Wade, we all reached for it. I don't exactly, you probably remember, I don't know who grabbed it, but it was either me or Wade. Or maybe it was my dad. I don't know.
Yeah, so I was kind of on the opposite side, so I didn't really have a shot at that shirt at all. So
Right.
you kind of all got a piece of that shirt,
That's right.
which is what kind of starts the whole controversy.
That's it.
And
So
yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I mean this starts the whole controversy, and this goes on for years.
Oh yeah, people don't even understand. People don't even know. It's gone on forever. It's gone on since the history of time of the fact that like I at some point had possession of the shirt, but my dad pulled a King Solomon from the Bible, and instead of cutting the shirt in half, which he probably should have done, which would have been a better solution, he instead was like, okay, well, you get the shirt for a while, and then I would have to give it to Wade for a while, and we would go back and forth. Somewhere along that journey, that shirt vanished. Now, I blame Wade. Wade blames me. The fact that that shirt went missing is a huge ordeal, and it will forever be part of our lexicon because it's one of those of like, everybody has those that has a brother or sister. You have this story of something going wrong. That's ours. And poor Tony gets drugged in the middle because Tony is the independent witness where there was often times where like, well, who actually caught it, Tony? And this would come up years later. And he was like, well, you guys all kind of touched it at the same time. And we're like, no, Tony, it has to be Tony. I've been friends with you longer. I mean, it was a war over this stupid t-shirt.
Which
And to this day, it's still gone. No one, it's gone. It's horrific.
So yeah, 92 is pretty big. I mean, it starts out pretty good. I mean, it's like The Hand That Rocks the Cradle comes out in
Yeah.
January. Cuffs with Christian Slater
Oh
comes.
yeah.
I saw that one in the theaters.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Hand That Rocks.
You might have been the only one.
I loved it. I saw Cuffs in theaters. I saw Hand That Rocks the Cradle with my mom and some
Ooh.
family members. No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
isn't that a little bit of an erotic? Isn't there some erotic elements inside of that with Rebecca De Mornay?
It never stopped my mom and I from going to theaters.
I love
Ever.
it, dude. It's awesome.
I mean,
It's
I
great.
see awkward stuff with my parents all the
Now,
time.
side tangent. Who did you see Basic Instinct with?
Actually, I didn't see that in theaters.
Okay, because that could be a kind of awkward. I mean, remember at the time that movie was very controversial.
It was, and it was like we were still kind of, you were a couple years younger than me, so you didn't get to see it
Yeah.
all for a while.
Yeah.
But
No, I was never allowed to see it. That's why That's why I cut porno out of a out of a penthouse with a razor blade because I couldn't see Basic Instinct.
yeah, that's a far more rental for me later on.
Yeah,
Down the road.
100%. Yeah, that's a
That
definite
is
form
that
of
one.
it.
It's like it's one of those things. Like I hadn't started. There's a part where it's like I haven't started driving yet,
Right.
and things like that.
Right.
So once I start driving, I get to theater all by myself a lot.
Right.
But
Right.
that doesn't happen until like later, 1992, and October. So it's like much later, and then 93 and 92, 93. So, but we'll get to 93 later on. But point being, 92. Yeah, I mean we start off with like Hand That Rocks the Cradle and all those movies. And one of the big ones that my mom and a couple of ones that came out in February that my mom and I saw, Stop or My Mom Will Shoot.
Oh, classic. Yeah, that's
The crazy,
classic.
the crazy Sly Stallone movie that he hates
Yep.
this day.
Yep.
Yeah. But it was pretty funny. And
Is that
final
Estelle Getty? Was that Estelle Getty in that?
Estelle Getty, Sly Stallone. You know, I still get made fun of for liking that film.
Oh man, I've seen it. I watched it.
Yeah.
I think I saw it in the theaters, but I can't guarantee that one.
Well, it's one of those movies. It's like my mom and I still talk about it to this day because the old pineapple chunk scene and stuff like that, and where she's
Yep.
trying to do stuff for her son and everything, and we still talk about that. So like, Mom, don't be like Estelle Getty from Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Stop doing that. And she's
Great.
oh, I just love you. I just love you.
It's so good, dude. Such a great concept. I
And then
think that
and this is also the year where my mom and I start going to a lot of like midnight movies.
right. That's a big tradition in your family line for sure.
Right. Midnight movies were kind of a big thing, like midnight previews and stuff like that. And we started going to a lot of late night movies. And one of those is Final Analysis with Richard Gere and Kim Basinger.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah.
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 That's a
And
classic.
that's like a February 92 film. And we saw that. I vividly remember going to the theater, Carmike 10, new theater, watching that movie with nobody else in the theater except for my mom and I at midnight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It
And
was
that's one of
pretty
the things like
spectacular.
but what's interesting is again looking like comparing past and present. Back in the day, a movie would do a premiere. You wouldn't have those midnight screenings were more, they were there, but in our neck of the woods, they didn't necessarily draw a big audience, right? I would never make it because we know me, I would fall asleep. That was the problem. I would get a lot of nudging if I saw a midnight movie with Tony, like wake up. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation for me. But the movie premiere culture was not what it is now, right? So now we have these big tent poles that get people to come in to see them if they go to the theater at all. But back then, that like that midnight movie, it was there, but it was really diehard cinephiles that would go to that, as opposed to what we see today, right? And so it's an interesting shift of the movie culture was very popular, but it wasn't necessarily into that. It it wasn't like a must see event like it is now. A lot of it's must see. You got to see it now, or you'll never see it again, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it kind of starts for me as far as like the midnight movies. It always started in 1990 for me.
Yeah,
You're going back a little bit because 1990 is the year that a buddy of mine comes in from Kansas City and he's visiting us, and we've only lived in the area for like a year ish, half a year or so, and then Dick Tracy comes
oh
out,
right, that's
and they
right.
have big this big premiere, and it's like we went to and we saw that at Springdale Six, and and they have this big premiere, and it is they give you a shirt that had a movie ticket on it, and it said I was there first. I still have
Wow.
I still have the shirt, and it doesn't fit, but I still have it. Um, but it's got this big ticket of Dick Tracy on it, and him and I saw this movie late night, midnight. It was actually 12:01. Started at 12:01, and you got to see
Crazy.
Dick Tracy at 12:01, and that's what kind of started the whole like late night movie phenomenon for me. Because I was like,
Yeah.
man, this is great. You can go see these movies before anybody else sees them. It's like
Right.
if I go in there and I'm in there at 12 o'clock at night, I will see that film before anybody else.
Now, do you remember? Was it busy? Do you remember it being crowded?
That particular movie was packed
Right, because they
because
hyped it.
they hyped it. Yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
it'd be a little different than what would come up, which is like all of a sudden they just have midnight movies,
Yep.
but and they wouldn't hype them at all. But sometimes they would be, depending on if it was a bigger movie. But um, as far as like movies like Final Analysis, that was just a midnight movie. This one got hyped, had the T-shirt, had the whole promotion behind it, and it was a big deal. And I remember walking past, and going, "My gosh, we got to go see that. We have to go." I kind of dragged him along to it, but
Right.
he's a willing participant. But it's one of those types of things. That's what kind of started the whole late night phenomenon for me, and I'm still into it.
Yeah, you've always been a night owl, though. I mean, that's kind of your nature. There's
Yeah,
in all transparency, there's a funny thing that occurs that's occurred in our lives for years. This is why we can talk to each other at any given point. He knows that I get up really early. I get up at like 4 a.m. to go to the gym or get ready for work and my whole process and all that stuff. And I will have text messages either waiting for me or I will get text messages like 5 a.m. And I know he's not waking up. I know he's been awake. He hasn't gone to bed yet, is what has happened. And I'll get these text messages, movie references, whatever it be. I'll have these texts. And if they're waiting on me, chances are I go back and look, and he just was maybe like 20 minutes earlier than I woke up. So I might have slept to 4:10 and he sent it at like 3:50. And so it's like he knew I was close to getting up and he sends them because he's a lot of times it's Wings, the TV show is something we share. It's a reference. But it's been that way as long as for time we've had this relationship as friends where our communication works because during the middle of the day when I'm doing like my day-to-day stuff and we're not working on a movie together, which we did a chunk of time later on, we're not doing that. He's doing his middle of the day. So either we talk in the evening, which is often, and when we do, it's like a 2 hour, 3 hour phone call, or it's through these random text messages at like 3 a.m. It's just kind of the classic side. Let me ask you this, because I want
yeah.
to tee up for a little bit of a close, because I want to keep us on a nice fluid path here so that everyone can enjoy it for as much as they are. What do you think about, like when we look at the movie theaters, we've set this up. This is our story. We're telling it. Hopefully listeners relate. And I think you will more as we go. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, I know you still go to the theater, but obviously the pandemic changed some things. Movie practices have changed. What do you think it is about the 90s and this time frame that a lot of people refer to as the golden age of movies? They really do. That's a term that's out there. You can watch other YouTube videos on it to see discussion. What do you think it was about this time frame at theaters because the content's what's driving people there, obviously. But what do you think about this time frame, not just from our own nostalgia, in reality of film history? What do you think about this time frame that made the theatrical experience so different and so important?
So there's a couple things that's kind of driving it, right? I mean, it just depends on what you were into. Music is a big part of this.
Yeah,
You know, like the soundtracks, like that promoted a lot of films,
that's a good point.
and it made movies a lot more like, oh, you must go see this. You have to see
Right.
this. You have to see this at the theater. You have to go to the theater. It's like, it's, you know, when soundtracks, like, I'm just going to throw one out there, just as a reference, but like the movie The Bodyguard or something like that. You know, like Whitney Houston releases this big, huge soundtrack for this movie, and then all of a sudden the movie goes big bonanza boffo because everyone's hearing these songs, everyone's hearing these things on the radio, and then they know it's from this. They know it's from here. You could buy the CD, and then everyone who wanted to buy the CD wanted to go hear the songs in the theater, and it's great sound. You know, it's the biggest screen possible, and that is something that is we've taken for granted now because people have 90-inch televisions now.
Right.
You know, people didn't have
Right.
that, and so you were getting to see things on the biggest screens. And back then, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have some of the distractions that are there now that people don't want to deal with. But back in the 90s, it was just this, man, we got to see that movie on the biggest possible screen because it's got all these special effects, or it's got, it's Jurassic Park, or it's all these big, huge movies that, people just go, if I don't see that there, you were kind of told by the studios too. It was kind of like, if you don't go see this on the biggest possible screen, you're not seeing it in the best possible way.
Interesting, good point. In that, also, I think it's taken for granted now how much stuff, day of date releasing, where it's in theaters and on Prime the same day. You have the idea that it can immediately go to streaming eventually. Obviously, stuff is pirated like crazy. You have all these factors that go into digital delivery that's changed the
Oh,
viewing experience. To your point, even at home, even if you don't have all those things, but movies come out faster. So one of the things I think that was always interesting, right? I mean, we would wait. I
oh,
remember Return of the Jedi, seeing it in theaters as a kid at the Bel Air Twin, and seeing this movie in theaters as a kid. And I waited what felt like a effing eternity for it to come out on VHS. And when it did, I wore that son of a gun out so fast because I love that movie so much. Same way with Indiana Jones. I remember seeing Raiders on beta. Like, it took forever for movies to get released in these formats. Even when DVDs came out, that process, that Hollywood held back the movies a little bit longer. There was a
yeah.
waiting period, anticipation. That all went away. So you wanted to see it in the theater. Otherwise, you weren't going to see it for almost, in many cases, upwards of a year to a year and a half before you could see a movie.
That's exactly right, and that's the other part of it too, is the release date. So you would see a movie. Let's say you're going to see, Jurassic Park. Okay, you see Jurassic Park. If you don't see Jurassic Park in the theater, it's a year before you get to see that on video.
Yep.
And right around the year, it was the release time from theater to VHS or DVD, and so it'd be a whole year at that point. And so, especially VHS, because it just took longer. And then we're in the 90s, so we're dealing with VHS. But
Yep.
um, but it would take a year, and then it would take a solid about year and a half to 2 years to get that on the cable.
Right. Right.
So if you had cable, if you had the premium channels like the HBOs and stuff like that,
Hell's box office, sir. Hell's box office.
else
That's what it was in the 90s. Hell's box office.
it would take a while to get those films, and if you were waiting for them to go to a network, then you were waiting like probably about 2.5, 3 years to
Yeah.
see that. And so
Yeah.
that's what made it also. It was like if you didn't go, but nowadays, you could see the movie on demand almost at the exact same time that you can at the theater if you really wanted
Oh,
to.
yeah. Yeah.
And
Even certainly.
some people are releasing them simultaneously. They've kind of stopped doing that because they realized they weren't making any money doing it.
Right.
So they've kind of stopped doing that. That was kind of something that came in with the pandemic. But yeah, I mean, they now people are starting to get rid of DVDs and things like that. So your secondary markets have all changed. Now a movie will be out and then it'll be on streaming within a couple months.
Yeah.
You know?
It's it's um
So
it's a
it's just
different
changed how we
experience.
can.
Well, but so here's the other side of this that's really interesting, and we're going to wrap up this part. I'm going to ask one more question after this statement, and then we'll go forward. But the interesting part is what I think as filmmakers, what I think is being missed is when we change the way that the films are distributed, how you see that content, how you view it. It also changes the way in which movies are made. So whereas there was this anticipation and this build, and there's a certain, I mean, it goes all the way into the writing. Back in the day, there's a formula of writing that's called the 10 reel because they would put certain acts to happen when they would have the cigarette burns where films would overlap, right? You'd have to do the film overlap, and they didn't want to have a big action scene when you're overlapping pieces of film because it ruined the action scene or the moment. So they would try and hide those in dialogue sequences where it would be on a soft cut. That's changing the way filmmaking is being made. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just simply saying that it has altered the way that movies come out. Now things are turn and burn so quickly. VHS is a problem that caused that, which we'll talk about when we get to our low budget episode, because we're going to have to talk about some shitty low budget movies at some point, pardon my language.
Right.
It's going to happen, but it's just the flow of how things go. So let me say this. Part of what, or I want to get your thoughts, like what can listeners and expect going forward? Because we have a lot queued up, a lot of fun stuff. Can you give us a little bit of tease? I'll throw a tease and then we can kind of charge ahead from there.
Oh, from what we're gonna talk about?
Yes, sir.
Oh yeah, man, we're gonna get in all kinds of fun stuff. I mean, the year of 1993 is so loaded for us from
Right.
start to finish. It the stories that are going to come out of that year alone are magnificent, absolutely magnificent. Probably one of the greatest years of my life. Maybe I'm going to assume it's one of the better years of your life, and
Oh, 100%.
it's just
100%.
absolutely one of the greatest years of all time from start to finish. There's going to be so many episodes just dedicated to that one year. I don't think anyone's going to want to miss it.
No, I'm totally with you. I think it's really going to be an interesting series. I'm excited about it, not just because it's us having a little bit of nostalgia, but more importantly, I think it's interesting because we can actually kind of document if you're an aspiring filmmaker, doesn't matter what age you are, if you wanted to be a filmmaker, this is a little bit of you'll start to see our journey, and we're going to do our best to tie back in some of the projects that Tony and I have worked on together, not to promote our films. That's some of them are garbage, I'll be honest, but it is
Wow.
that you could see that well, I mean, I can be hard on my own content. You can see the overlap of where things influenced us or like steered us or inspired us. And I think even more importantly is this beautiful idea is as we're looking back on this and we're looking at these movies and these stories and these tales, it is a beautiful reminder of what the future holds as for others, because there's other people that can step in that space. So I think it's going to be a fun journey that I hope people understand and appreciate the idea of it's raw. It's like, I mean, that story is not necessarily, I mean, I don't care. I'll tell any story, but the point of this is to have that honest conversation, talk about this and capture these moments while they're still here. So if you'd like to be part of the conversation, hit up the show on Twitter. The link is going to be in the bio or in the show notes rather. You can hit it up on Twitter. Tony's way active on it. If you troll him, he'll troll you. Delightful times. He's a master. We'll also, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for hanging out on YouTube. Hopefully we'll have more added in. I'll do my best every once in a while. If I can repost or post a clip or a trailer or whatever, I will do that. Eventually we'll have a Facebook page set up. All those things will get into place as we go through it. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with this first episode. Next episode, we're going to dive in even further. I will tell you that there's another episode coming up specifically about Army of Darkness. Very important movie in my life. Tony and I get to talk about that one. There's more along the way. Lots and lots of stuff. Join the conversation with us over on Twitter. We'll hang out with you then. Tony, you got anything else to say before we go by?
That's it. That's it. Thank you for joining with us.
All right, cheers. I'll see you guys soon on whatever medium you love to be on. Later.